series. In this episode, I'm going to attempt to bring to the fore the life of one of Warwick's countesses, Elfrida Marjorie Greville, née Eden. But just a quick word about names before I begin, otherwise this could get horribly confusing. I'm going to refer to Elfrida by the name she went by and how she's always addressed in the letters that we have, and that is Marjorie. Similarly, her husband Leopold Guy Greville will be called Guy, and her brother will be referred to as Anthony because he was always known as Anthony, and yes, the Anthony Eden, one-time Foreign Secretary to Winston Churchill and sometime after British Prime Minister. Marjorie will also be referred to by the name Brooke, as she was quite often Lady Brooke. The topic of this video emerged from an opportunity I had to catalogue the remarkable First World War letters written to Marjorie from serving members of the Eden family. Though in the main from Anthony, there are others from brother Tim and possibly a cousin, Evelyn. The letters give a riveting insight into the experiences these men were enduring. However, the more I read, the more I wanted to know what Marjorie was doing. What follows then is by no means a definitive look at Marjorie's experiences, as bound by the records held here, many as yet unexplored, there's still a lot more to know. But I've made some hopefully feasible presumptions which need to be either confirmed or discarded by someone who's interested in Marjorie or maybe a dedicated historian. Though the letters generally don't shed much light on Marjorie's life, naturally they answer Marjorie's questions. They request favours from her, they inform her of events and goings on, they thank her for her lively letters and gifts, they ask how she fares, and they warn her to take care of herself. So they cannot help but hint at the role Marjorie was playing. But to begin with, a little background. Marjorie was born in 1887 at the Eden family seat of Windlestone, County Durham, daughter and favourite of William Eden, who amongst other things was a noted art collector, and Sybil Eden, née Gray. She had 4 brothers, John, known as Jack, Timothy, Robert, known as Anthony, and William, known as Nicholas. Marjorie and her mother had a fractious relationship, but both were considered to be beauties of their day, and both were painted by Singer Sargent. This painting of Sybil would form part of a sale of paintings in 1917, a consequence of Marjorie's mother's unrestrained spending and an issue that raises its head in the letters. That this image of Marjorie is easy to find online is heartening. That little more can be found about her is disappointing. The eulogy on her death, extracted by Sotheby's at the time of the sale of this painting and included here, tells us that as a girl, Marjorie would be one of the few who, on one of her father's hunters, would be following close behind him across country. No mean feat. I don't think this tenacity ever left her. By 1909, Marjorie had become engaged to Guy Greville, and we have here the letters from Guy's parents, Francis, 5th Earl of Warwick, and Countess Frances Daisy Greville, welcoming Marjorie to the family. Guy and Marjorie married in April that year at St Margaret's, Westminster. 3 children were to follow: Charles Guy Fulk Greville in 1911, Richard Francis Maynard Greville in 1913, and John Ambrose Henry Greville in 1918. Guy was already a career soldier when war broke out in 1914 and soon found himself in France, and Marjorie's marriage to a brigadier general was to prove useful, as it is clear that through him she strove to protect and promote her brothers. This was particularly true of Anthony, although she at times writes to his superior officers serving alongside him and who were family acquaintances, asking them to keep a watchful eye on him. In my opinion, events prior to Anthony and Tim's deployment to France excuse Marjorie of this little bit of nepotism. This preserved throwaway note seen here, ripped at the top because time was of the essence, is a great indication of how Marjorie would act when it came to her brothers. Telling Marjorie he wouldn't be able to see her as the last of the horses were being loaded aboard ship and he couldn't miss the ship sailing, Jack sends his love. But she has scrawled frantically that she is there, waiting at the gate to say goodbye. It seems that she has no intention of letting him go before she has seen him. This was probably written in August 1914. Jack was killed in action in October that same year. Beyond trying to influence her brothers' careers, we also get a sense of the vital support she personally gave her serving family members, including Anthony, Tim, and Evelyn, and she does this both in emotional and practical terms. From Tim, we have thanks for the nice letter sent in reply to his anguished one from a German prison camp, where he has been interred at the outbreak of war. Also, he thanks her for the books she has sent, presumably to keep him occupied. The letters from Anthony begin in 1916, just before he embarks for France, and continues through to 1918. They are evidence of the close relationship between him and his sister, a bond that survived until her death. She sends various parcels, including sugar plums at Christmas, but throughout his time on the Western Front, she sends parcels of food and clothing for both him and his men. This is equally true for Tim and Evelyn. But most poignantly, perhaps, are the letters sent from Anthony almost as soon as he reaches France, where he questions the dreadful rumours concerning the death of their brother Nicholas, killed at the Battle of Jutland, fought from May to June of 1916, and where Nicholas was serving on HMS Indefatigable. He was aged just 16 at the time of his death. After their father dies, it is she who manages the sale of paintings in London, arranging transportation, whilst having to handle their mother's difficult behaviour. And through the letters, we also learn of the injuries sustained by Guy, severely affecting his leg and hand. When Charles Duncombe, Earl of Feversham, is killed in action in 1916, Anthony turns to Marjorie, asking her to relate the awful news to his wife, Queenie. This is a natural request, as Charles was a close family friend, and Queenie was Guy's sister. Hence the reason the Record Office have this photograph of Queenie in the collection. So far, we see Marjorie as correspondent, concerned sister, wife, supporter, messenger, and mother. We have yet to investigate another role she juggled, one that is shadowy in the records that we have. There are a number of mentions of Marjorie being on a train in France. One reference occurs in a letter we have already seen from Tim to Marjorie on the 24th of January 1916, telling her to look after herself while she is living on the train, concerned she is getting thin. And her obituary sheds a little more light, noting she served on trains running between the Western Front and the clearing stations of Poperinge, Bettin, Bailleul and Merville. My digging around the online military sites hasn't been very successful, but on the Forces War Records website, 2 entries are listed for E.M. Brooke, one for 1917, the other, accompanied by the word lady, is a company commander for the Auxiliary Territorial Service for 1938, but she's located in Devonshire. Unfortunately, neither entry gives the full name of this person or persons, and so it's impossible to be sure if either or none of them are Marjorie. So what follows is theoretical as opposed to definite. Next to the 1917 entry is written Sister, Quaimnsr. which I will explain later. It tells us the lady was British and was awarded 2 medals for distinguished service, the British War Medal and the Victory Medal, which was usually awarded when someone had received the 1914-15 star. The website also mentions the award of a Gallantry Medal, the Associate of the Royal Red Cross. If this entry is for Marjorie, then the latter medal was awarded, as the website explains, to a fully trained nurse of an officially recognised nursing service, military or civilian, who has shown exceptional devotion and competency in the performance of actual nursing duties over a continuous and long period. And it goes on, or who has performed some very exceptional act of bravery and devotion at her post of duty. Please keep in mind the medals. So we know this person was serving as a QAIMNSR. This stands for Queen Alexandra's Imperial Military Nursing Service Reserve, which I'm going to refer to as a QA because it's rather a mouthful. And certainly, once nurses began serving on ambulance trains travelling back and forth to the Western Front and the clearing stations, including those mentioned in Marjorie's obituary, they tended to belong to this branch of nursing. They were also issued with passports to France, and here we have Marjorie's passport, stamped several times in 1915. Further delving reveals Marjorie received service medals, including the Star, awarded to those who served in a theatre of war. More work will need to be done by a willing historian to check that this is Marjorie, but I'm inclined to believe she was a nurse serving on an ambulance train. If she was a QA, then she would have been dressed in the distinctive grey dress and scarlet-edged cape, or entirely scarlet cape depending on her rank, as seen here. She would have been viewed as highly qualified and up to the demands placed on nurses serving on the trains. Not all nurses were deemed suitable for this role. They needed to be willing to go to the front, resilient enough to cope with the very worst of injuries and witness the full horror of war, treat the injured whilst in transit, with shelling occurring all around them. They also needed to be able to work with the sometimes difficult COs on board. I urge anyone interested in the role women played during World War I to look at the various websites now available online, particularly the QARANC website at www.qaranc.co.uk, where extracts of the war diaries of matrons can be read. They back up the anecdotes of gunfire and shelling occurring overhead while the trains travelled back and forth, and also tell of the shelling and noise of gunfire at the clearing stations. Aside to the risks nurses took in travelling on these trains, not just from shelling, but from jumping from carriage to treat injured soldiers, all nurses were at risk of various life-threatening diseases. It isn't uncommon to read of the death of nurses from enteric fever and meningitis, and then many contracted measles, flu and scarlet fever. Fatigue and stress also looms large, and must have been a daily battle. However, reference to St. John of Jerusalem could be another clue to Marjorie's involvement in nursing during World War I, as we see a subscription to the organisation in her personal account book of 1916. Whether she was affiliated with the QAs or the Order of St. John's in a nursing capacity, or both, I hope someone can shed more light on her involvement and let us know. 1918 brought Marjorie and Guy a new addition to the family, and with the end of World War I, it would be hoped Marjorie's war had also peacefully ended. But it wasn't to be, and she would be immersed in some very difficult personal battles. Perhaps it was a result of his injuries, but Guy descended into the alcoholism that would go on to damage the family catastrophically and eventually kill him. In this letter to Marjorie, dated July 1920, it is clear Marjorie and Guy's marriage was in crisis and that she had separated from him, taking the children in an effort to shield them from all that must have been going on around them. Marjorie and the children were seemingly leading a fairly nomadic existence at the time, moving to and from various relatives' houses. But contrary to Tim's view that she should find a way to divorce Guy, she did not, and in 1928 she became a widow. Marjorie would go on to settle in France, but her connection to Warwick stayed strong. In 1929-30 and again in 1931, she was invited to take up the position of Mayor of Warwick, which she did with great application. And remember the medals? In this picture, Marjorie wears the Star, the British War Medal and the Victory Medal. Pip, Squeak and Wilfred. Above these she wears the Star of a Dame of Grace of the Order of St. John. When war broke out again in 1939, Marjorie returned to London and, despite the Blitz, insisted on staying in the capital to help with the war effort, particularly with the French contingency. But once again tragedy would strike, as Ambrose, her son, a flight lieutenant, never returned from a mission to the coast of France and was missing, presumed dead, in 1942, aged just 21. 1943 would see Marjorie's final battle. According to Anthony Eden's biographer, Robert Rhodes James, Marjorie had been diagnosed with cancer. An operation was attempted in January 1943, but, as the Warwickshire Advertiser stated in its 5th of February issue, she had been left in a critical condition, and they went on to report her death on the 12th of February 1943. I don't know whether she ever received confirmation of the death of Ambrose before her own. She was interred in the family vault at St. Mary's, Warwick. Marjorie's was an extraordinarily courageous life, and, as I've mentioned several times, I sincerely hope that someone will delve deeper into the archives wherever records of her exist to give the full biography that I think she deserves.